Today I had Constance, which is a fantastic name. I feel like we could use more Constance. Is that maybe I'm not using that correctly. Constance, lovely name. Sent in an image of a painting that I'll be critiquing today. I decided today I'm only going to do one image. I think there's enough in this one image to discuss that I think it will be fruitful just doing this one image. So with that, let me transfer us over to Photoshop. And there we go. All right. So Constance sent in a lovely painting here. It is a painting of an interior, a room with a chair and a desk and a lamp, a picture on the wall, a curtain and a window. And there are a lot of things that I enjoy about this painting. So first off, the paint application. There's very impasto paint, very thick paint. There's some indications throughout the image, like down here. When you start to see sharp lines like that in the texture of the paint, or the way this kind of, it breaks up at the edges, but there's kind of a more flat surface in the middle of that mark, that gives us some indication that she's using a palette knife to apply, but there also looks like there's some indication that she's using a brush, and perhaps the hard side of a brush as well, and who knows what else. But a lot of really thick impasto paint, which is just the material quality is a lot of fun to look at and always a pleasure. So there's that, and there's some really cool things happening here in terms of color. I think my favorite part down here, I love how this alizarin crimson, it looks like, or kind of quinacridone perhaps, is kind of blending. I like that color relationship right there, that kind of purpley mixed in with this neutral blue. And there's some other really nice subtle color relationships happening in there. Very strong narrative in the scene. There's a story being told here. And there's a nice, so here's the thing. There is a nice stylized quality about it, right? There is the way that that thick impasto paint is being applied and how it's distributed throughout across the surface creates this. Again, it's a stylization. It's kind of a generalization, abstraction that imbues a different kind of mood or personality to the image, which I think is quite nice. There's a lot of character here and mood because of the way paint is being used. So that is all very good. There are some, and I think maybe just to begin with, some red flags that are being thrown. Just from teaching painting and drawing for years and years and years, there are some things that I just immediately respond to, and it trips that thing in me that says, "Wait a second here," or like, "Hold on." These red flags that get thrown aren't necessarily always a problem. They're just like a wait, like just something that is a trigger that's automatic. One of those red flags is having a element of your composition come into contact with the border of your composition. So the format here is a rectangle. These chair legs are coming into contact with that border at a tangent, meaning at a single point. They come into contact right at the end of those chair legs at a single point. And let me just highlight this with a little red spot, right? So we have these points where the chair leg is sitting right on the edge of our format. So why is that a problem? Well, it's drawing attention to the edge or the border of the format. It's drawing your attention. It creates that little point of tension where we're not sure if this is a frame into another scene, like we're looking through a window in on a scene, or if this is in fact a box containing this, and this chair is kind of sitting on the edge of that box. So, not necessarily always going to be a problem, but it draws undue attention to the format. And that's not really, I think, the intention here. And I would just, I guess, caution that. In this case, she's de-emphasized this area. These values and colors are all consistent enough that I don't necessarily go there, except for on this side where you have this high value contrast right there around the leg, which does kind of draw my attention down there. And again, whenever you put that in an element of your composition in contact with the border, you're going to kind of create a tension there that's going to draw our attention or draw our eyes. Okay, the other red flag. So again, that's just red flag that catches my attention, and I'm kind of conditioned after years and years of doing critiques, conditioned to look for these things. Another red flag is you have your primary subject matter, or the larger elements in your composition, the picture, the desk, the chair, the lamp, as a grouping of objects that comprise this kind of scene, this narrative that is being told, right? That grouping of objects is almost exactly in the center, side to side, right? Centered horizontally. Not centered vertically, but our vertical center is probably somewhere around here. So it's almost like these rectangles of the picture frame and the desk are mirror imaged across that center axis. So there's a lot of kind of putting things in the center. I believe I've talked about this before and will no doubt talk about it again. That's not necessarily a problem. The reason that it might be a problem is that the center line, either vertically or horizontally, those axes are going to be natural focal points. The viewer's eye is going to naturally want to be to go there. And if we put all of our primary subject matter or focal points of our image right along that axis, it can be difficult to get our viewers out of there because they're going there automatically just by default. They're going to those center axes, and it can be difficult to just move them around the other parts of our image if we put everything right along that center axis. So that's why asymmetry, when it comes to studio art, when it comes to images where we're trying to engage a viewer, trying to get them in the composition, moving around, we typically want to shift our primary focal point and subject matter off the center axis, so we create asymmetry, create more movement, and we get the viewer off the center moving around the image, and it just is more engaging, more energetic. That being said, I feel like I always need to say that because it is a very strong default behavior that everybody has. We think, well, where am I going to put this desk and chair? Might as well put it in the middle of the composition, right? It's kind of a natural, it's an obvious place to put it. So we just tend to, by default, put things in the middle. Okay, so that's not always a problem, though. In this case, I think there is a lot of calm. It's kind of a peaceful scene. So, and it's a still scene. And there's not a whole lot of, I don't feel like there's intended for us to be moving around this image and engaging in that way. It is just kind of more, we are just kind of focusing on this thing happening in the middle. So maybe it's not such a problem in this. It's maybe it's in fact in line with what's intended, with what's trying to be communicated. I also see some opportunities here where Constance could adjust things a little bit, not changing any of the organization of elements in the composition, but adjust some things in terms of value and contrast to get us moving around the composition a little bit more, to kind of de-emphasize that center line and get us out into perhaps the sides and corners of the painting. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in just a second. Okay. So those are two red flags, putting some on the border and then putting your primary focal point, primary subject matter right in the center. Okay, now let's talk about just in terms of a focal point. I'm looking at this image, and where does my eye go? My eye is going to go to this picture frame up on the wall. We've got it occupies quite a bit of the pictorial space. It's bigger, we're about the same size as the top of the desk. It's high contrast. It's very well defined. It stands out, right? And it's kind of right in the middle where my eye wants to go. So that's it. My eye goes right there at the moment. Secondarily, I go down here And I want to spend some time here at the top of the desk, but right now I'm getting a little bit lost in this differentiation between the chair and the desk. It's kind of muddled in here. I feel like I want more definition there to kind of separate out those two objects, and it's my eyes having a hard time landing either on the desk or on the chair, right? I'm also wanting a little bit more differentiation between this lamp. I feel like that lamp is potentially a very interesting element in the composition, but it's getting kind of lost as it emerges with this frame, just in terms of colors and values. So some more separation there might be called for. So maybe that's what I wanted to focus on today is how could we improve this image by just separating out those elements, clarifying what's happening, just so it's easier to read for the viewer of like what they're looking at, and also to start teasing out where we're supposed to be looking. Do we start on the picture frame? Do we start on the desk and the chair, and then move to the lamp and then the picture? I want you to think about kind of this. The order of operations that you're implying in how you are putting together a composition. How are you telling the viewer to travel through your image? How you are responsible for creating something that is legible, that they can read, that they, and put together the story that you want to tell. Of course, they're always going to bring their own interpretation into things, but there's a lot we can do to help the viewer out. Okay, so first I wanted to go in here and focus on this chair and desk. So you see how this brown that's on the desk, this patch right there, this brown up in the corner, see how it kind of merges with the chair, the shadow of the chair, and it can be kind of confusing, like not knowing if this is a shadow or the color of the desk, not knowing if maybe these are, I don't know, it's kind of, there's enough contrast between these patches of the desk, these different parts of the desk, that it's kind of hard to see it as a continuous surface, as a solid surface. So maybe decreasing the amount of contrast between the different colors that are being used on the desk will help to solidify that as a surface, as a continuous surface, and help to differentiate it from the chair. I also have another suggestion here that might help differentiate or separate out the chair from the desk, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But let's see first, if we just decrease the amount of contrast, and I'm going to take down the flow of my brush here. So I'm going to steal one of these colors from the desk, and let's just take down some of the contrast between those areas. I'm going to take that dark brown right now and just make it more similar in value. Value is lightness and darkness, and hue, or the color. So just kind of scribbling over those dark areas so that they are a little bit more similar, more the same color as the other parts of the desk. So decreasing, another way of saying it is decreasing the contrast between these areas of color on the desk. Again, the attempt here is to unify this as a single surface and separate it out as from this information of the chair. So already just getting rid of some of the patchiness, the extreme difference of color and value between those different colors you use on the top of the desk, it's helping not only to communicate or to help solidify this as a continuous and flat surface, it also helps differentiate it from the chair. Okay, another idea that I had for you would be I'm going to go back and make my brush 100%. So I'm going to talk you through what I'm doing on Photoshop here, because I think some of you might be interested in kind of knowing the mechanics of what I'm doing in Photoshop. So another idea that I had for you, how you could alter this just to refine it and help clarify what's going on, is right now you have this really impasto paint application all happening fairly horizontally on both the tabletop and in the way that you're applying paint to these horizontals on the chair. One way you can help differentiate or separate out the chair from the table is perhaps change the direction of the paint application. So I'm going to take one of these colors on the top of the desk, and instead of going horizontal on the desk, let me choose a kind of good representative color. What if you applied the paint, and this is obviously not going to mimic the texture of paint very well, but hopefully you can kind of get what I'm after. So I'm just putting a bunch of vertical lines of color there. This is also doing what I just did by kind of taking out the contrast of all the different patches of color on the table. But you could help differentiate those two objects, the top of the table and the chair. You could clarify that relationship and the separation between those two objects by altering the direction of your impasto paint application, right? So all the texture on the surface of the desk would be more vertical or maybe at a diagonal that would be consistent across the surface of the desk and in a different direction than how you're applying the paint on the chair. So you can use the physical, the material quality of the paint to create that separation if you don't want to change the color too much. So a lot of different ways to kind of accomplish the same goal of clarifying what's going on here and differentiating between the chair and the desk. All right. Another way that you could potentially do that is by, well, actually, I'm not even going to talk about, I was going to say you could have a different vantage point and bring this chair up so it's in front of these lighter colors of the background, this white and the pink of the wallpaper. And that would help us see the differentiation between the background and the chair a little bit better because they're different colors. All right, so I think that that would be a way to separate those out, and this just feels a little bit confused in there. The next thing that I'm going to talk about is, and this is where I'm going to probably spend the rest of my time, is talking about value. So I think it was 2 live critiques ago, I spent quite a bit of time talking about light logic, and perhaps too much time. So if you're completely done listening to me talk about light logic, then you might want to skip this next part because I am going to go into it again. But before I get there, let's talk this through a little bit. We have 2 light sources that I can see in this image. We have this window over here that is a very strong light source. No matter how strong your artificial light is, usually the sun, either coming directly through the window or reflecting off walls and coming through that, is going to be a much stronger light source than your artificial light of this lamp. But we've got the sun coming through the window, a big window, lots of light coming in there, maybe catching on a foggy window or a curtain or something. And then we have the light source of this little lamp that's sitting on the table. It is not going to feel like a light source. So right now, let me get a different color here so we can see what I'm doing. Right now, this strong window light source, let's take a closer look. That value, remember light and dark, values light and dark, is the exact same value as this light value on the picture frame, on this backboard right there, or molding, whatever this is, on the top of the lampshade, down here at the baseboards. It gets a little bit lighter perhaps down here, but not much. So basically, this primary light source, this really strong light source coming in through the window, this is the same value as this white on the picture frame, as the white on the lampshade, on the backboard here, and on the baseboard, right? This is not going to feel like a light source, a believable light source, unless it's lighter than everything else, right? It won't feel like a light source unless it's lighter than everything else in the image. So the first thing that I want to do right off the bat here, if I can, I am just going to fill this whole layer that I've got with, I'm going to use kind of a dark brown, just because that's a little bit warmer than using black. So I'm going to fill that whole layer with a dark brown and change the opacity on this a little bit just to keep it clear what I'm doing. Okay, so imagine I just covered my whole painting with a layer of burnt umber, right? So everything now is dark. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to erase away parts of the image. And let me change the strength of my eraser. So I'm going to start erasing away parts of the image. Now, look at that already. Actually, I didn't do something. Before I do that, I'm just going to turn my image into black and white. Right? So take all the color information out. We're just looking at neutrals. We're just neutrals. And we're just looking at black and white. So again, if I compare my values between these different parts of the image, there is no contrast. There is no difference between my lightest light source and the things that supposedly are interacting with that light in three-dimensional space. And therefore, we have no indication of creating an illusion, a light logic, how light is coming in, entering into a three-dimensional space and interacting with three-dimensional objects in some kind of consistent, believable way. It's an illusion, right? It's a two-dimensional surface. So there is no light. There is no space. We're just creating an illusion of how light is interacting with these three-dimensional objects, or illusionistic three-dimensional objects. Okay, so looking at that, now that I've made everything else darker, this starts to feel like a light source, right? Now it's starting to feel like a believable light source. And then the lamp, right? Maybe I make that lamp. Now that lamp starts to feel like a light source because it's lighter than everything else in the image. So in order, your window is going to have to be the lightest. If you want that to be a believable light source, it's going to have to be the lightest. And the lamp, less so. Because, again, it's probably the case where the lamp is not quite as light as our window. All right. So already it's starting to feel more believable as a three-dimensional space. I still have enough information here in the background. And in fact, I'm going to change this layer to a multiply layer so I get a little bit more contrast in the background. Okay, so now let's just go through and start talking through how these two light sources would interact with this space. We do have some indications, I'm going to take that layer off, that Constance is thinking about this, right? There are definitely areas that are giving us some indication of that she's thinking about how light is interacting with the space. We have this part of the painted wall right there that's lighter than what's happening up here. So she's thinking about how this light source is hitting that wall. We have areas here of the picture frame white that look a little bit lighter than the areas up here. We see some yellow that seems to be radiating from the top and bottom of the light. That's hitting the top of the table. That's hitting this picture frame. See how there's a little bit of yellow there? The problem here is, and this is supremely important, this is why I keep on coming, because this is a common thing. Watch what happens if I turn off the color. So I don't see that yellow. Look at this. Look at how this place where that yellow is hitting is actually darker than the wallpaper or the color on the wall right next to it. So it is yellow, which makes me think that you're trying to use that yellow to communicate that this part of the wall is getting hit by the light source, but the value is darker. The value is more important than the hue in communicating how light is interacting with space, because it's actually darker. You're not projecting light onto the wall. It got darker, right? So it's counteracting that light logic that you're trying to establish. So that's a problem. All right. So even though you have yellow, right? Yellow is a hue. It's not necessarily lighter, which is value. You've got to get those two properties of color differentiated. All right. So let's go back to what I was doing over here. We've got my keyboard here is flopping around. Okay, so we've got our scene here. And I'm going to continue erasing out areas here so we can kind of go through and just, again, logic our way through this. So I've got this primary light source. Let's start with that. Primary light source coming in through the window. It would probably be hitting, it looks like she did make the parts of the curtain lighter. So it would be hitting these parts of the curtain, which she got. Be hitting maybe the tops of these parts of this curtain. It would probably be bleeding down through below the bottom of the window a little bit if these curtains are sitting away from the window, and probably hit a little bit up here at the top of the curtain. So now that's starting to look, that looks believable. And then as it gets away from the window, it gets here below the window, it's going to fade off, right? The light is no longer hitting it directly, and it's just kind of getting reflected light down here, so it's got to be dramatically darker. Okay? I would also probably be getting some of this light hitting the chair, the top of the chair. So maybe this side of the chair right there would be lighter. Perhaps I would be getting some light spots on the sides of, I'm going to make that smaller, side of the table right here. Let's see if I have enough value to kind of make that happen. I might have to come back with a brush here. But I'd be getting some highlights on the sides of the chair where the sunlight would be coming in and hitting that. I might not be getting any of that sunlight, or not much of it, on the wall here. Maybe most of what's the light that's hitting the wall is going to be coming from this lamp's light source, or a light source that we can't see that's outside of the frame. I'm probably going to be getting some of that sunlight coming in from the window as it kind of comes in here, is going to hit the floor. It's going to be away from the bottom, right? Is this area below the window is going to cast a shadow and not allow the light to hit right here, right underneath. But the light from the window should probably be hitting up here, kind of towards the bottom of the chair, right? So I'm going through and I'm just thinking, like, again, logic. If this light source, my dominant light source, were interacting with these objects, what would that look like? Where would that light be hitting, and where would it not be hitting? Okay, so I'm actually going to just really quickly go on a different layer, pick up my brush just so I can emphasize this, take the color, it's a white light coming in, and tabletops are often kind of glossy, so it would be reflecting that white light fairly directly. And I'm just going to hit the sides of this table with some of that bright highlight, and that's kind of going overboard, perhaps. Maybe I've done that a little bit too much. But I'd also probably be getting some of those highlights on the sides of this chair. That's going to kind of separate it out, and maybe even over on this side of the chair. Just some indications. I'd get some of this purple. Let me see if I can get... I'm going to put a little punch of color in there. Maybe that's the wrong color here. A little bit of a punch of color in here, and that's not light enough. Just so you can see what I'm doing. So that light coming in from the window is going to be fairly light value, so it would be hitting the side of this chair. I'm trying to give it a little bit of texture there by scribbling. And then maybe I'd be getting little highlights on the top of these rungs on the chair side of. All right, so you can see how I'm thinking through how this light source of the window would be hitting the chair, and then the wood on the chair in different ways, and the table, this side of the table. Okay, so now let's go to our lamp on the table. So I'm going to start erasing that. So usually the lamp shade is going to be blocking some of the light, depending on how transparent or opaque that is. And it's going to be allowing more light. We're going to see more of that light happening right at the bottom, the opening at the bottom and the top of the lampshade. We'll get a little bit brighter light. And maybe this is going to be better if I do this with a brush instead of erasing. Let's see if I can grab some of this lighter yellow color. So I can, if it's a yellow light, if it's a warm light, by all means, we want some of that yellow. But more important than the hue information, that is yellow, more important than that, it's got to be lighter than the surrounding area, right? It's value that's more important in this case. So it's going to be, I'm going to have a little bit of more of that light value coming in the top hole of the shade, and a little bit more coming out perhaps as it catches the bottom edge of this lampshade, and that will be lighter than the lampshade itself, depending again on how opaque the shade is. If it was a little less opaque, maybe I'd be getting more of that warmth, and that's not a very good example of it. It's too intense. If I pull that down a little bit. So if it was a more transparent lampshade, maybe I'd be getting more of that warm light kind of glowing in that lampshade. But you see how that is starting to glow? It's starting to feel like a light source. That has to do with value. It's not the yellow that's doing that. It's the lighter value. If I make this black and white again, do you see how the top of the lampshade and the bottom is a little bit lighter than the lampshade itself, but not as light as my strong light source over here at the window, right? So I got to get those values right, or it's not going to feel like light no matter what color it is. Okay, so let's go back here to brush, and I've got that warm light, and it's hitting the top of my the base of the lampshade. Let me bump that up a little bit. Top of the lampshade right here, and then the top of the table. It's going to be most intense. Let's see, I'm going to pick up, what color would that table be? It would be a little bit kind of more of a brown color. If a warm light source were hitting it, it's still brown, but it would be kind of a little closer to yellow because it would be getting hit by that warm light source. So I'm going to try something like that. Let's give that a try. So it would be hitting this tabletop most right under that lampshade. And then the further away we get from that lampshade, the more that light is going to fade, especially if this lampshade is opaque and not letting much of that light. All right. So now that starts to feel like a believable light source hitting the tabletop, and then I've got this strong secondary light source coming in the window, hitting the edge over here. I'd probably get a little bit of that lamp light depending on how close the chair is to the lamp on the sides of the chair right here, maybe on the tops of these verticals here, depending on how they're positioned or if there's any change in direction. So I've got this warm light coming from over here, and then a cooler light coming on, hitting this side of the chair. Maybe, and again, it depends on the positioning of the chair, how far away it is from the table. I might get a little bit of the bleed of that lamp light on the top of this, and it actually wouldn't be that color. It would be something, that indicates more of that purple, but probably a warmer version of that purple because of the warm light. And then let's talk about how that would look hitting this wood in the back, this white. So again, I'm seeing in the original, you've got this yellow color. It's not the yellow that's making it look like a believable highlight. It's the value, right? So that lamp is hitting that white board in the back, adding a little light there. It's hitting the matte of the picture right here, and then gradually getting darker the further away it is. Maybe since this top is really close or kind of hit by the top of that top hole of the light, maybe that's a little stronger right here than it is over there. Don't know. These colors in the painting that are closer to the light source are probably gonna have more color, or more lighter values. The clouds up here, I don't know exactly what's this image is of, but these values are going to be lighter and then get darker gradually as they go away from the light source. Remember, this light source is not as strong as the one over here, so we got to take that into account. And then right where you have it, Constance, you had it right. You're getting You'd have this lighter area on the wall that's getting hit by the light source, right? And then we'd get that kind of glow. Okay. So now we've clarified, or we've strengthened that sense of light logic. We get a sense that our strongest light source, it's a lighter value than our weaker light source, right? Let's turn on black and white. See how the lampshade, even at the top and the bottom, is darker than the strongest light source. If this light is as strong as this light, it's not going to feel like a stronger light source, right? It sounds obvious when I say it like that, but you've got to think these things through if you want believable three-dimensional space. All right, and then thinking through how they would be interacting with these three-dimensional objects. Now, so these two light sources clarify how we're supposed to read the image. Typically, we're going to go to the place of highest contrast to start with. So we'd go over here to this window where we've got these really dark browns next to this white, and that points us. We follow the direction the light falls. Maybe we'd go over here first because it's closer to the center of the composition, and we've got these kind of warm yellows and high contrast. But it starts to differentiate. It creates space that helps us to understand what's going on in the scene. It helps differentiate between these different three-dimensional objects, or illusionistically three-dimensional objects. And it starts to, lighting always creates more of a sense of mood. But to me, clarifying these values, these light sources, also helps to separate out the objects of the composition. So I'm not changing any of where these different objects are placed in the composition, how they're arranged. All we're doing is creating more contrast and clarifying their relationship to each other in this illusionistic space. It helps kind of separate them out. It kind of gets rid of that, the messiness, or kind of how they all get jumbled in the center here. All right. So let me do a little before this. This is before, and then this would be after. Before, I'm going to turn the black and white on real quick. So before, and then that's just, it's without the little highlights that I added. That's right. And then taking off the black and white filter. So here is my final statement about this painting. You might like it flatter. That might be a stylistic decision. You might prefer that aesthetic. A lot of artists do. You might not care to have that much value contrast. You might not like the mood that comes with that high, kind of like darker midtones, right? And higher contrast. You might want it more friendly, lighter, less gravity, more stylized, more abstracted. All those things are fine. So you might not want to go here. You might not want all of that atmosphere or illusionistic space, and that's fine. I think you don't have to do that. I spent so much time on this because I did see some indications that you were trying to go there in terms of how you're suggesting light interacting with those objects. But even if you don't want to go to that place where it's a more naturalistic kind of lighting scenario and light logic, even if you don't want to go there, I do think you need to figure out how to separate out these areas where the chair and the desk get kind of jumbled, these areas where the lamp and the wallpaper and the picture frame start to get jumbled. You've got to find ways to separate those out and clarify that. That will help us to understand what's going on, and just help create more compositional, like a sense of space and let those different objects of the composition breathe and interact and not feel like they're kind of mixing in with each other. The last thing that I had meant to mention here is, as if Constance, as if I've not gone on enough, and this, I'm spending more time on yours than I think I have on any of the others. You're the only image I got today, but also I just think there is so many really good things to dig into here. The last thing that I wanted to mention is something that I mentioned in a previous critique, and that is whenever we have areas where we have complex visual information in our source material, whether that's we're looking at something that's complicated like the pattern on a rug or the pattern of wear and tear on a wood floor, and we're taking that complex pattern and we're having to generalize it into something a lot more simple, either because we don't want to make it really complex and don't want to be exact and detailed in that, or are the tools that we're using to represent that are too dull, like we got a big thick brush or a palette knife that can't get that detailed. Whatever the case may be, we find ourselves often in this situation where we're having to take complex visual information and simplify it. What we need to be careful of is when we do that, oftentimes we'll slip into autopilot and tend to kind of do everything in a consistent way and consistently distribute visual information. So what I mean by this is down here in the rug, so I imagine this rug was probably had some kind of more complex pattern on it, and you're choosing just to kind of make a texture down there that approximates that those colors in that pattern. Be careful not to just go on autopilot. What I'm seeing is that there's a consistency in the thickness of these patches of color. So there's kind of a similarity of width, right? It kind of goes this yellow patch, purple, yellow, purple, yellow. I don't get the sense that this rug is a striped rug with kind of thick stripes or evenly spaced stripes. I get the feeling that there's perhaps some kind of more complex pattern or picture in there. But the way that you're generalizing that is to create these kind of consistently spaced and thick patches of color. And the same thing or a similar thing is happening in how you're dealing with the wear and tear on the wood. There's kind of a consistency in the thickness of these patches of color on the wood floor. And notice they're similar to the thickness of the patches of color you are generalizing on the carpet. So again, we think we're just kind of randomly creating visual noise that kind of approximates a complex pattern or visual information, but we easily slip into this default and an autopilot behavior where we end up just kind of evenly distributing the same width and same size of information. And is that a problem? I think it is, because it starts to generate, whether or not we're really keyed into it, it generates a pattern that is perhaps not as interesting and lifelike, as natural as we experience in the real world, where, just the way that our positioning in relation to these objects, we're getting size variation just because of linear perspective, right? Things that are further away are going to be smaller, things that are closer are wider. So there would just be more natural variation in the real world. So I think there's a kind of a tension that happens there when we do have these kind of consistent or even distribution of visual information. All right, so when you're generalizing complex information, don't let yourself just kind of go into default behavior and evenly spread out that stylized or abstracted complex visual information, if that makes sense. Hopefully I'm saying that in a way that makes sense. All right, you guys, I dug deep, Constance. I dug deep, and I hope it did not come across as or communicating to you that this was an especially an image that's in a lot of need of critique. That's not the case. I just thought there was a lot of really good opportunity here to talk about these issues that I see a lot in in art classes, and doesn't matter the medium, doesn't matter the kind of image. They're worth digging into and being very thorough about. So fantastic painting again. Overall, I think it is lovely, and you could leave it as it is, right? I give you these suggestions or give you these ideas and critiques, and hoping that some of it might help you refine and improve in ways that you want to refine and improve. Um, in the end, we're not always just trying to exactly reproduce, our source material, what we're looking at, or if we have photo reference or whatever. It is, in my opinion, in the way that we alter or change what we're seeing and filter it through our own abilities and these different mediums and these different ways of making marks. That's where the character, that's where the life of these paintings come from. So I don't want to communicate that that those evidences of the human touch are anything but wonderful. Anyway, Constance, thank you so much for submitting your image. It is a wonderful image or wonderful painting, and it was a pleasure to talk about it today. I hope that was helpful. And again, to all of you, let me see if I'm back here on screen. If you would like to submit an image, you are welcome to do so. You can email me any images that you would like me to critique to dablon@gmail.com. Keep an eye out for registration for my mixed media class, which will be a 5-week course starting on January, I want to say 18th. So in about a week or a couple weeks. And if you're interested in critique groups, keep an eye out for the registration for that too. You can join my email list if you want updates or more information at my website, which is dablon, dabbleon.com, where you can also see other classes that I'm teaching and other classes I have available for that you can register for now and have access to. And I will end there. Happy Thursday. Have a great week. And I hope to see you next week.